We talked about identity. We talked about some of the protocol development and progressive decentralization. Now that leads us down the funnel to reputation systems. So you wrote an article on reputation a while back. I loved it. I think you set a lot of the stage for how people are thinking about reputation in this space. But what led you to write this piece, and how are you thinking about reputation in Web3 today?
Yeah, for sure. So I wrote this piece with Scott Commoners, who I know was on your podcast too.
Yes, shout out to Scott.
Yeah, big shout out to Scott. And we wrote it as a reaction to what we were seeing in the space, which was when token, right? And like launch token at initiation or like at start of project, and the speculative like downstream impact that had, and sort of the eventual kind of shutdown of many of these projects. And so we were reflecting on what is sort of the cadence again, or like ordering or sequencing of how you might think about these reputation systems or these token systems for various projects. And so what we developed was essentially this framework around a 2-token system. One, non-transferable, that's based on your contributions. And the second is sort of a transferable token that's sort of like spun out from that non-transferable token that's sort of assigned based on your contributions. And the sequencing really relies on where you're at in the progress of the project. At a pre-product market fit stage, where you're still figuring out the core components, if there's no intrinsic motivation to contribute in the project or in the system, it doesn't make sense to introduce a financial token. And so we were talking about sort of starting with a reputation token and introducing one further down the line when there's some stable state, proven intrinsic motivation to contribute. So that was sort of what the piece was explaining. We go in into much more depth. And I think the last thing I'll share here was we relied a lot on precedent. Like if you think about games have points and coins, a lot of them. They might call them different things, but points are things you aggregate based on your contributions, how well you're playing the game. And, with your points, you can get these coins that you can spend in the economy. Like you can buy shields or whatever for yourself, for your character in the game. And, you might be able to transfer these coins to other folks as well. Like you can gift them to your friend for their birthday. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of what it was also modeled on. Like there's a lot of precedent for this. It's not an entirely new framework. We just sort of like shaped it for the current use case.
Yeah. Going back to your when token comment, that kicked this all off, that was definitely happening for months in like 2021. Every project launched, dropped a token. Now, do you see that as being really detrimental to kicking a project's, what's the right way to frame it? Is just dropping a token and giving it to the user base detrimental to the long-term success because it's not really given out based on someone's actual contributions? It's kind of just given out to anyone who maybe is a holder or of something, but maybe they haven't made contributions that were beneficial to the long-term success of the project, and they're just here for short-term gains.
I think I don't want to make a generalized statement because there might be very specific use cases where that is important, but in general, in social systems, that is probably a bad idea because it creates like extrinsic motivation to contribute that's not really based on real interest or need. You're not necessarily serving a need for them other than number go up. And maybe that is sort of the need that you're trying to build for. And maybe that is what the product is. But in many cases, that wasn't the intention. And so for those types of projects, that's the wrong approach. You're not really helping solve a core need for that person. They're not intrinsically motivated and contributing in the system. So it's a flawed approach.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I feel like I read a lot of stuff talking about the cold start problem and how it addresses that. And that makes sense to me. But it sounds like while that does address that problem, there's other problems that it kind of brings into the fold just in terms of your community, your user base, why they're there, why they're participating. maybe my last question around reputation and identity is, if there were, I'm going to use the number 3, I'll let you answer it how many you want, but if there were like 3 pieces of data that you'd like to see tracked for people's reputation and identities across our Web3 ecosystem, whether that's on-chain data that you associate with your digital identity or off-chain, what pieces would you like to see brought into the fold?
So I will caveat this by saying that it's not necessary that data is on-chain. Most data shouldn't be on-chain. But what I do think is important is media metadata. Media metadata meaning like understanding factually what this thing is. Like this thing, this URI, this link is referencing this song from this artist. Like that's really important media metadata that should be publicly queryable and is currently very difficult to query. I think the other one is general like sentiment or context around media. Like this is what, the impact of this piece, or this is what people think about this piece on an aggregated level. Whether that's on-chain or off-chain is I'm uncertain about, but should be quite easily accessible. And then the last thing, which I think is really important, and this should definitely be off-chain, is any form of interest or taste data around users, where they're able to port that in or provision that into apps and get personalized experiences and get sort of like, full control over what's going on in that specific instance. So those are 3.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.